Hey guys, gals, and MPs. Today I'm going to do some fun things with the Novation Summit here. Alright, so in one of my previous videos on the Peak, I brought up a whole thing with the effects section. Obviously the effects section on the Peak and the Summit are the best effects section on a synth that I've ever used, but they do have one caveat. And if you don't use them in parallel, if you use them in a serial configuration, each of the effects still has a wet and dry right into the signal mix. And the easiest way to deal with that is just to turn down the entire wet mix on the Peak, I believe it was. You'll have to go back to one of my previous videos where I discussed that. But on the Summit, it doesn't work that way. It even states that in the manual that it doesn't work the same way. So the way you have to do it on the Summit, unfortunately, is you have to use the auxiliary outputs on the back here. You can kind of see it. And just use those. And the problem is when you first start a patch and you have it set to all default, let's just do that. Let's do an init patch. You won't hear anything whatsoever. We're going to have to make some setting changes for that. So to make a setting change for that, go into the settings here. And we want to go to, I think it's like page 13. So let's find page 13 here. And I already have this set, but what you want to do is go up here to the FXA or FXB, depending on what layer you're using. If you're using both, that's fine. And you want to set them either both or singly to auxiliary. Yeah, we're just going to go ahead and set layer A to auxiliary because that's the one we're using right now. You can do both, like I said, if you're making a double layer. Make sure that you change this back to main when you're all done with this. Otherwise, you're going to be pulling out your hair wondering what the hell you did in a certain configuration change if you want to run these back in parallel. As you hear, even though when we do that, we don't get anything out. But here's where the magic happens. If you go back into the FX section, we're on page 1. Set this from parallel over to any of the serial settings. So I always do chorus, let's see, CDR. So chorus into delay into reverb. Let's do that. Chorus, delay, and reverb. Now you hear something. But just like the Peak, when you bypass it in a mode like this, where we're just outputting the effects signal by itself, you will get absolutely nothing. But this will cause it not to push the wet signal and the processed wet signal together, which introduces a little bit of latency, which sounds like comb filtering. It doesn't sound very pleasant, and this is the easiest way to get around it. I need to contact Novation and see if they just have a way to fix this, because this is really ridiculous having to go through this, especially on such an expensive synth. But it's not like deal breaking because you can work around it, and it's not like something inherently defective on the synth like on some other synths. All right, so that said, now we have that. So that means that, for instance, now the reverb control becomes completely wet if you want it to. See? Oh, I'm in the wrong setting. That's time. Whoops. All right, so yeah, there you go. But to bypass an effect, you just have to turn the level all the way down. You can't just use the master bypass button. That's the only caveat to this. And of course, you're using the auxiliary output. Annoying, yes, I know, but that's the only way I figured out how to get around it in this mode. And you also want to make sure that the wet and dry level are set to 127 here. These don't do anything. The wet and dry level don't do anything when you're in standard main output mode, and it states that in the manual. And that's one way you used to be able to get around it in the Peak. But yeah, okay, so that said, that gets that out of the way. We don't get any nasty comb filtering when we run this in a serial mode. Parallel mode, you won't hear that, obviously. So we're good to go there. And what we're going to do kind of a fantasy style pluck. So we're going to do almost like a harpsichord-esque pluck, and we're going to use the FM section on the synth, which I always overlook on the Peak. I always forget that the Peak had FM, but on the Summit, as you can see here, we actually have an entire FX section, or sorry, not FX, FM section right here. If I was saying I have FX on the brain, but I meant the FM section. So yeah, so we're going to use that. So we're going to use basically one oscillator. We're going to frequency modulate that with another. We're going to use oscillator 3 as one of the, yeah, so it'll be, we could use even 2. It doesn't really matter. We'll use 2. How's that? Yeah, that. Well, no, because we need to do 3 into 1. That's fine. We'll use the oscillator 3. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to set the coarse tuning to 8. This just, I just like this offset. Kind of think of it like transpose in this case, but yeah, 8 semitones up. And that kind of has a fantasy feel to it. Let's go ahead and actually shape the envelopes first. So we're going to turn the frequency all the way down. So this, by default, all init patches have key tracking already in them. We want no key tracking. So make sure you turn this up and turn it down so we get no key tracking whatsoever. All right, we should hear nothing. Switch this into 12 dB mode, and let's use the envelope depth here. Let's go ahead and shape the amp envelope. We're just going to add a bunch of release to it. And now we have to add some release, obviously, to the modulation envelope, which will be the envelope used by default for the filter. See what I mean? That really has a fantasy style already to it. Make sure the sustain's down. I believe it is by default. And let's turn up the decay a little. And let's mess with the decay just a little. That sounds really nice. Let's give it a little bit of overdrive into the filter. This is where a lot of the magic of the Summit comes on, is the filter sounds absolutely excellent, but you can overdrive the shit out of it. I mean, listen to that. Now that sawtooth kind of sounds like a sine, doesn't it? Or a triangle even. Let's not use that much, but can add a little more release to that. We may run out of polyphony at that point, but we'll use some effects, and we have 16 voices of polyphony, so it's kind of really hard to really run out of polyphony on this thing, unless you're using this bitimbral mode. That already sounds gorgeous. I mean, it's not where we want to be, it's very boring, but with the transposition we put in there by changing the coarse tuning on the oscillator, it kind of has that already fantasy feel to it. All right, we're going to use oscillator 3. So let me think this through. We have the carrier and the modulator. I don't remember how FM works. Whatever. Oscillator 3 is going to be modulating oscillator 1. So let's change it. This, we want it to be the exact same frequency. We want it to be 8 on the semitones, whatever frequency you pick for the coarse tuning. And we haven't heard anything yet because we haven't engaged the FM yet. So we want to turn the FM all the way up. So I'm going to start playing a key and bringing the FM up, and you'll hear what it does. And that's really all that's really to it, in my opinion, to do this specific patch. I know it's a little bit on the boring side, but I'm going for fantasy feels right now. And that's what I'm really working on musically, personally, so we'll release some music soon on my channel. We want to add a little more decay, because if you hold the key down, it abruptly stops because it's going through the decay stage now. There we go. All right, let's now add some effects. We could add some voice spread to it to make it nice and wide, but let's just do the thing with the chorus, because the chorus sounds really good on this. So let's bring in some chorus. Let's make sure we're in 4-tap mode. That sounds nice on this. And just to mention, you can do all this on the Peak too. It's just not going to be out on the face value as easy to do. I'm not using any of the dual filtering options. I am not also using any of the bitemporality of it. I mean, you're going to drop down to 8 voice polyphony, but for a patch like this, that's fine. You'll still have the excellent effects section. We're only using the effects section once here. We're not duplicating it. All right, I like to turn the rate all the way down on that. Really, not all the way down, but... Yeah, so you get that fantasy vibe. Isn't that great? All right, so we can add delay if we really want to, and reverb is a must in this. But so let's just add a little bit of delay and see what all that does. Let's go ahead and bring it up to about 50/50, which would be 64 there because the maximum is 127, so it'd be like 63. So let's do that. 63. We can change the time all the way up. And I really hope that you have your Peak or Summit up to the latest firmware because there's a lot of things we can do with the latest firmware, obviously. Especially with the delay section. So if we go into effects here, if we go over to this second page, yeah, so now we have like a phaser flanger thingy or a and with no feedback, it actually sounds really nice. I mean, here, let's just listen to that, for example. And if we add some feedback to it. I don't know. Should we keep that in the chorus mode or should we use the flanger? I don't know. I like the chorus a lot, so let me bring that to 0 feedback. I don't know. We're going to keep it in the chorus. All right, so let's go to the delay section. We can also do a low pass and high pass filtering on that. We'll keep it by default. Same goes for the delay. We'll keep the low pass dampening to about 85. And then let's go into the other delay section that I like the most of. The width should be up to 127 by default, but we don't get any stereo spread on it. So what we have to do is an LR ratio. We'll do 3/4, 3/4. And then we want to go over to the next page, which is page 6. We want to go to the type, or actually, yeah. So no, so we want to set that to crossfeed. And then the time mode is something that they added in like newer firmware, which you can get an astronomically large delay time in this thing, but it sounds like really lo-fi. And I don't mean lo-fi in a bad way. I mean lo-fi in a very good way. Let's listen to it. Oh, we have to turn on some delay first. I think that sounds really good. So we're on max delay time right now, but what we can do is we can use the time mode modifier and we can go up to hex lo-fi. This is just, watch this. All right, we're just going to wait for it. Yep, still waiting for it. There you go. And listen to how crunchy those repeats are, aren't they? They sound nice though. I would say they almost have the aliasing of an analog bucket brigade delay without all the noise. I like it. And obviously with such a long delay time, you can do Furpertronics with this thing. You just turn the feedback way up, so let's do that. I think it self-oscillates. I'm not too sure. I try not to get delays to self-oscillate because I hate the sound. course, I messed up those notes, so now... And I will say you need to be careful about when you screw up in this mode, because I haven't found an easy way to clear the buffer without just like muting the effect and waiting for it to go on. Well, I mean, I guess you can turn this back down to normal, turn the feedback down, and clear it, but that's a pain in the ass. So let's do that. So yeah, you can do like really cool sounding for Petronics on this. So that's absolutely just wonderful. And I think it sounds good. We haven't added the reverb yet. So I want to add the reverb. Let's turn that down for now, and we'll do the reverb next. So the one thing that I will change on the reverb, the default settings are pretty okay. Once you turn it up to the maximum size, you want to go into the mod rate. You want to turn it up to about 15. Keep the depth maybe at around 70. And then that's all we need to do there. And there should be a reverb pre-delay. Make sure that's 0. There you go. So... turn the time around here. And just because we don't have any of these effects bypassed right now, what's happening in the background as we play, the buffer of the delay is actually filling up. I'm in here. There we go. Isn't that cool? I think that's cool. Turn that down a little so we can talk over that, or I can talk over that. I think that's gorgeous. With the reverb having modulation on it, and very lush and beautiful modulation, it just sounds so good. That's where a lot of effects just fail on synths. If you have an okay sounding reverb, which I'll go with like the TO5/Take 5, the reverb sounds okay, especially on higher settings with, or like higher decay times with some dampening in there, because otherwise it sounds too harsh. There's not enough filtering, not enough diffusion in there. They're stagnant because there's no modulation. Yes, you can go in and assign a parameter to the pre-delay or pre-decay of the parameter. I think it's just pre-delay. It doesn't sound right. It's not the kind of modulation I want. It's not modulating the tails of the reverb, I should say. This sounds like it's modulating the tails of the reverb. And again, this definitely sounds like it's one of those reverb networks that you're using a bunch of delay lines mashed up together. You can tell that by changing the time, you see. Well, not the time, but the size, I should say. So if I go and... see there, that's what I'm thinking is happening there. You're changing the size of the buffer for that, but it's also changing the processing speed of the reverb algorithm, but also increasing the size of the delay lines. I could be wrong on that, but that's exactly what that sounds like this reverb is working with. But there's also really good filtering and very good diffusion in this delay, and it just gets massive. It just gets absolutely massive. So yeah, I'm gonna turn the feedback down here. But yes, at the highest delay times for the delay in this, the thing does for Petronics, and it does it in a nice way. Like they're crunchy. The repeats sound nice. There's obviously some filtering you can set with that, but all in all, you can do some really cool things with this synth. Especially, like I said, just with the simple FM we're doing here. Also, let's go ahead and turn this down. There's some other things you can do specifically with this. All right, so that sounds nice. It sounds kind of fantasy-esque, right? All the wave shapes on this synth, as long as you put in a proper wavetable yourself, if one of those has some movement in it too, the shape control does something on every single setting, at least on the default waveforms and the default wavetables. Obviously, the wavetable mode, the shape moves through the wavetable. But on a normal shape, what it'll do is it'll actually change the shape. And you can do that on any of them. It's not just pulse width. On pulse, obviously, the shape controls pulse width, but here. Can make it sound narrower and nicer. And you can also do that to the oscillator that's modulating the other oscillator. Do that to both of them, and then we can get this lovely thing. Let's add a little more overdrive in there. And there's just so much you can do with that. And don't forget, on top of the overdrive to the filter, you have post-filter distortion. Which actually is not. Oh, that's the course rate. I am doing the wrong damn control. I'm like, what's happening with my synth? There we go. Oh, yeah. As you can hear, the time changes actually change the feedback as well. So what's in the buffers, that's kind of fun. Could be undesirable depending on what you're trying to do with it, but... And I think that sounds absolutely gorgeous. Very fantasy-esque. Something you wouldn't expect a digital, in quote marks, synth to do. I'm really getting fed up by that. People just coming out of the woodwork saying, oh, don't compare, digital oscillators to analog or digital filters to analog. You know what? It doesn't matter if it sounds good. Those are also the kind of people that make zero music, so, I will say there are some caveats to having fully digital signal paths and that are nice in an analog signal path like this, because you can overdrive the shit out of the filter, and it does things that you should... I wouldn't say they're good. They sound great, but you're hurting the filter. Not really. I'm just kind of kidding. But when you really push an analog filter and you have that headroom like a synth like this does, you can just saturate the shit out of it and it sounds really nice. But that said, you can emulate that pretty well on a lot of digital synths these days. I've mainly just kept this Summit because of its workflow, and I really do like the filter. The filter on this does sound very unique. I haven't found a digital emulation of this filter that's like dead on. It's the same reason that I have the Polybrute as well. That Steiner filter in there is just lovely. I mean, there's plenty of ladder filters out there I think sound really good in the digital domain, but other than like a few like niche synth emulations out there, there's not that many Steiner filter emulations out there in software, especially not in a box. So like something like the multi-poly is obviously not going to do the Steiner filter thing. And what I mean by that is it does this very specific thing when you overdrive it with the brute factor, where it softens up the filter, but in such a lovely way. So that said, filters behave differently, obviously, in digital versus analog domains, but this kind of proves that the oscillators don't matter all that much, do they? Though the oscillators on the polybrute actually sound phenomenal. And on an aside of that, I saw some waveforms of the polybrute oscillators. They're like dead on perfect. Like these square waveforms and the triangles and everything, they're pretty dead on perfect. That's surprising. Maybe that's why I like gravitate to that synth so much, the polybrute that is. I gravitate to this a lot too because the waveforms of the oscillators, the VA style oscillators sound good. Obviously with wavetables, you open up so many more possibilities. And this being an FPGA synth, with no traditional DACs in it either. I mean, obviously you have to get the signal out from the digital domain, but this uses an oversampling DAC. So as far as I know, all you do is you just, if it's a true oversampling DAC, there's only a filter in there, and you're directly driving the output from one of the FPGA pins using a filter network. So you're just, it's a capacitor. Is it just a capacitor and a resistor? And then you filter out all the high waveforms to get what you want. It's not like a ladder network. But you don't get aliasing. That's what I was going to get. Because they drive it at such a high rate, it's like 24 megahertz on the output. You don't get aliasing. Yeah, enough technical talk about that. Just listen to the sound. And I do like the overdrive on this. I do. One of the caveats I will say that I've noticed on the TO5 and the Take-5 now that I sold them, and I did notice actual aliasing on the outputs on those when you really pushed the signal hot on those. And I think that was I always said I couldn't tell, but I think in the previous videos that I've done with it and some of the music that I've done with it, listening back to it, when you really push the oscillators hot, especially on the TO5 where you can just really push them past the limit where they kind of like distort through the signal path, you could definitely hear a little bit of aliasing on it. Maybe that's just the oscillators themselves ringing, or maybe it's the filter itself ringing, because that can kind of sound like aliasing, right? But yeah, I've never heard aliasing on this unless you use wavetables that specifically are low res. I mean, it sounds gorgeous. But I will say the multi-poly, on the other hand, I've also not heard aliasing, but I think that thing oversample, or like they're 96 kilohertz oscillators on the thing instead of... Well, whatever. I don't even know what I'm talking about on that point, but I'll have to look into it. Either that way, this thing, like I said in my last video where I was saying which synths I'm keeping, this is the awesome reason why I'm keeping that synth. If you can hear it in my voice, I'm just so always happy to use this synth. Also, I've really come to really like this keybed. Actually, quite a bit more than Fatar keybeds. One thing I've noticed on Fatar keybeds, they're very clacky unless you have the felt on the top row, and I noticed that like the TO5 and the Take-5 definitely didn't have that. I will say I like the keybed on the Polybrute a lot too, but it's not as nice as this one. The Polybrute has a pretty nice keybed. It's a little cheaper feeling, definitely. It shouldn't be that cheap feeling for such an expensive synth, but I can live with it. A few of my keys are very noisy on the Polybrute, but not as bad as they were on the TO5 I had. I had 2 sharps and 1 flat. I think it was F sharp 4 and I don't remember which other ones. They were definitely, you could hear the spring quite a bit. This is a nice quiet keybed. Doesn't matter all that much if you're using headphones like I am, but in a quiet section you could hear it. Yeah. So I'm going to stop talking about that and the Summit, right? I mean, again, you can do this on the Peak as well, but not with this much polyphony. So this patch was pretty simple. Kind of just wanted to showcase how I get around the comb filtering in the effects section, which is another I wish they would fix that in firmware. I'll talk to them about that. But you overdrive this filter. This filter does so much nice things when you're mean to it, per se, right? Those are just sounds I don't expect from a synth in general. We're using this as a traditional synth. This is now a subtractive synth. We're not using the wavetable capability. This is just not sounds that I usually feel that I get out of a normal subtractive synth because of the FM and everything. I guess it is an FM synth now, isn't it? Oh well. Alright, that said, I'm rambling too much now. I'll stop the video here. I hope you liked this as much as I like the sound of this thing. My next videos are probably going to involve more of the polyvert because I love it so much, but I should bring the multi-poly out. I'm looking at it right now off camera, just sitting there being sad, not getting used. I'll have to use, I finally did get some, I almost bought the Roland black MIDI cables, but the gold ones were on sale for the same price. So I got the gold one. I got one of those and it fits my, what is it? The Arteria, the Nest thermostat one. The Astrolab. I'm looking at the thing right now. The Astrolab, it fits the port on that really well without being too tight. So I'm going to start using my Astrolab as a controller for like my multi-poly and my steam pipe and things like that, and the Op6. So that's cool. So that worked out. All right. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more, go ahead and give me a thumbs up here. Or if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.